Hi everyone, my name is Hend Azarair. Welcome to another Product HQ live chat where we are speaking to different product leaders this month to learn about their journey and lessons in their product career. We are live and this will be an event that's going to be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to our LinkedIn, YouTube channel, and newsletter to be notified of these events. And for the audience that's currently with us, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the chat. We will make time at the end of the interview to answer any of your questions. And today, I'm very happy to welcome Santiago Pompo, who is currently a principal product manager at Adobe. He works as part of their AI machine learning innovative group. In the past, he's worked at Hewlett Packard and at Meltwater, which is a media SaaS company. He is a highly skilled product leader with a focus on design, SaaS, 0 to 1 product market fit, and go to market strategies. He also speaks 3 different languages and somehow finds time to play the guitar. Thank you, Santiago, for being with us tonight. My first question for you is you have a unique transition into product. You started out from sales and you were a social media manager very early in your career. And from there, you transitioned into product. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, and thank you so much for having me, Hen. I really appreciate your really kind introduction. That was awesome. And you know what might seem like an unorthodox path to product management actually isn't when you take into consideration what product management is. So let me tell you a little bit more about those initial experiences. When I first joined Meltwater, which is the SaaS company that is now a public company, at the time it was a small startup, and I joined their team as a program called an International Management Training Program. And my first rotation was as a salesperson. And my job was to take the product that they were selling, which was a media monitoring tool, and sell it to customers so that they could keep track of all of the press that was being published about them in online and in different social networks and so on and so forth. So through selling and consulting and implementing this SaaS solution for different customers in different industries, I really learned to understand like the product pain points that existed with the product that we were selling. That gave me a ton of customer insight as to which value propositions work, which ones didn't, what features sold, which features were missing, and how we compare to our competitors. After doing that for like a couple of years and then becoming a manager of sales folks, there was an opening that started, which was to use one of our products, a social media marketing platform that we had developed in Meltwater, to do the social media marketing for the company. So essentially becoming a customer of our own product. And I had the opportunity to move to the headquarters of the company, which was based in San Francisco. And at that time, social media advertising and social media marketing was just beginning. Facebook wasn't even like a publicly traded company yet. It was just very early days for social media marketing. And this was one of the first products in the market. So for a year to a year and a half, I was one of the very first community managers and social media marketing managers, I believe, kind of like in the world. It was a very nascent industry. But through doing that, through essentially using the product day in and day out to try to do social media for the company, I realized that there were certain things that were missing in the product. There were some other competitor offers in the market that had some features that we were missing. And at the time, I was reporting to a marketing vice president, and he told me, "Well, you've sold the solution. You have used the solution as a customer, so you have a pretty good understanding of what works and what doesn't. Would you be willing to work with the engineering team to help us come up with new features and try to improve the product?" So, still working in the marketing department, that VP gave me the opportunity to do one big UI redesign initiative with the engineering team, and that project ended up being very successful. The engineers really enjoyed collaborating with me, and that's when I found out what product management more or less was. I had no real technical background. I didn't know much about technology, but what I did have was a very thorough understanding of what the persona was and what the customer pain points were. And that was missing from that equation. So I ended up becoming the first product manager for that solution in the company and ended up being one of the first PMs in the company overall. So that's kind of how I got into that transition. In fact, the advice that I would give to folks who might be listening to this channel is if they're interested in product management and they are working either in marketing or in sales or in other departments in the company, start by really providing the insights that you have that you can bring to the table to the product team and recommend features based on your insights. I remember very clearly that while I was working in sales, I recommended a feature to one of the existing product managers at the time, and she took it, she understood the value, and she ended up implementing it. And then she gave me credit for having come up with the feature when they were releasing it. So that's a way for you to get into the space. And eventually, of course, you have to be very intentional. At some point, my VP asked me, "Hey, do you want to keep working in marketing and managing the social media strategy for the company, or what do you want to do?" And I had to be very, very explicit about wanting to move full time to product management. So that's kind of how I transitioned into the role formally.
That's great advice too, to be able to find an opportunity within the company that you currently have for some people that want to transition into product management. How did you familiarize yourself with product concepts when you first started learning?
Yeah, I would say that there's three big areas of product management. As a product manager, you need to have a pretty wide range of skills, and you have to be familiar with three big things. Number one, you have to learn the craft of what product management is, and I'll talk about that in a second. The second thing is that you're at the intersection also of like the technical profession. And the third part is that there's this whole user experience side of it in design that is very critical for product management, especially when you're doing customer facing product management. And so you have to be very intentional about building skills around those three areas: the business project management side of product management, the craft of product management, the technical side, and the design side. And so uh, let's start with the first one. How did I learn about like the trade and the craft of product management? I think one of the things that sets apart great product managers from good product managers is like having intense curiosity. And fortunately, there's enormous resources available to anybody online to really kind of like get the foundation of product management under your belt. And I will share with our audience some of the great resources that I've discovered online. But essentially, a big portion of being a product manager is self learning and continuously keep increasing your skills as a product manager. So, for example, there's this one GitHub repository that has enormous amounts of like news articles, blog posts, all sorts of resources for you to really learn the lingo, the principles around product management, and the frameworks for prioritization. Kind of like all of those rudimentary skills that will be very helpful to you. Then there's like newsletters that you can subscribe to keep furthering the skills that you have once you have that foundation down. And then there's folks that you can follow very closely that are always sharing their knowledge. Essentially, you can create these relationships online with people that are more senior than you, that are consistently sharing lessons that they've learned, and that has been a great source of learning for me. In particular, I'd like to call out two different people. uh, there's this gentleman called Shreyas Doshi. A lot of folks know him in Twitter in product management. This guy has worked at Twitter, I believe Google, Stripe, and he has incredible content where he distills with incredible clarity foundational skills and more advanced skills for product management. Another great newsletter that I'll recommend is one from Lenny Rachitsky, who really focuses on growth and product management skills in general. So, if I could summarize that just one bit, is that through self education and online resources, you can really get some of the foundations. If you are completely green to product management and you are not working in a team, I would recommend that you do an introductory course, whether with PM HQ or any other vendors, to get kind of like a grasp for what the field is, but you can get a lot of things done on your own. And in fact, building those skills and that resourcefulness is going to be very critical for your success. Now, moving to the second part of it, and I think this is important, is how do you develop your technical skills, right? I didn't have technical skills starting up. I studied economics and psychology in university. So I had a little bit of that kind of like that chip on my shoulder, or I was always a little bit self-conscious that I didn't know how to program initially, and so on and so forth. But it turns out that learning how to program and code is not necessarily the most valuable skill for you to be an effective product manager. However, you do have to become more technically savvy. And I think the best way to do that is to build a very close relationship with your technical counterparts inside of your team and have them teach you and guide you in understanding how your product works. So I'll provide a couple of recommendations around that. Number one, you should get very familiarized with what the stack is in your product, understanding what technologies are used to make your product work. What are the programming languages? And then understanding what is the system architecture of your product. What are the components? What are the services? And how is the product architected? And what are the different mechanisms for things to work in your system? At the beginning, when you don't have that technical lingo and that understanding and concept, it's going to be a little bit overwhelming. But a good technical counterpart will be able to make it sufficiently high level for you to understand kind of how the system works. And if you don't understand a term or something like that, simply if you're in a meeting and you don't understand, for example, a different type of database or like a messaging queue or something like that, and you don't recognize that word, jot it down and go Google it and then learn how it works. Again, a lot of the job is you learning on your own. But I believe that building that relationship with the engineers, asking questions, asking them to paint out a picture of the system architecture is very important. The last couple of things about building technical skills are the following. I think it's important for you to understand data models and data structures, how the information in your product is structured, how is it stored, and how do you retrieve it? How do the APIs inside of your system work? What information they send, et cetera, so that you understand what information is being collected, how it's being organized, and how you can use it inside of the product. And then maybe a last little bit is understanding how developers work. So how does code how does an idea become code, and how does that code get implemented? How is it tested and how it's deployed? Understanding how developers work has been incredibly helpful to me. Obviously, it takes a lot of time for you to like work through all of these and learn them if you don't have any concepts to start with, but it's absolutely achievable. And in fact, throughout my career, I've done a number of coding boot camps of different durations to just get some more familiarity with the skills. I don't think that I am a programmer today. I think I have some rudiments in different languages, but I think what my technical counterparts have really appreciated is that I've gone the extra step to try to really understand how it is that they work and how technology actually works and how software building actually happens. And once you've gone through those experiences, you start accruing this technical knowledge, and you can have these conversations and participate in more meaningful ways with your technical counterparts. So that's it. And maybe I would say this: as you develop your skill set as a product manager, I would encourage you to take some formal courses to close some of the gaps that you feel like you want to close. For example, a very important skill for product management is to be able to have data literacy and data competence. And if you've never interacted with a data analysis software, or you don't understand how to do SQL or how to interact with databases, doing a data analysis course can help you really clarify and augment those skills. So in my career, for example, I've done a data analysis bootcamp, I've done a coding bootcamp, and now that I work in machine learning, I actually did an executive certificate at MIT in machine learning to really try to deeply understand, as far as I can go, of course, the subject and the field in which I'm working.
It sounds like you're very curious and you're always thinking ahead in terms of how you want to delve deep into the knowledge. And can you describe a little bit of how you learned about design? Because you also have that as a background.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, design and user experience understanding is one of the most fascinating parts of product management. And I think it's important to say what a product manager should know about design and what a product manager should not focus on as a designer. You have professional designers that have built an entire career and expertise to build beautiful experiences and cohesive experiences. So, as a product manager, I don't think that you should aspire to replace the design team and to try to build very high fidelity prototypes. But spending time learning how to build knowledge and skill in user experience is absolutely critical for product managers. And I think you can break that down in three parts. The first thing that you can do is to learn the design patterns of your own product and the design language of your company. So, what do I mean by that? Every product has design patterns that exist in it, and those means those are components that are repeated consistently across the experience to build a very cohesive user experience. For example, there's specific fonts, specific button types, specific behaviors on how the menus interact, specific flows, even though the tone of the language that is used in the copy inside of the product. All of those things have been created intentionally by your design teams. And as a product manager, spending time with your design counterparts to learn what those design patterns are and what that design language is very important as a first step. How is that useful? Once you master the design language and the design patterns of your product, you can now come up with new features and new experiences that are consistent and that build upon what's already available in the system to make a cohesive end. And I think that that's a really great first introduction of to design. I think the second thing that you can do as a product manager, and this is one of my favorite things actually, is mastering wireframing and quick prototyping with design tools. You can use Adobe XD, Figma, or even something like mockups or Balsamic. But I find that incredibly helpful because when you are writing requirements or you're providing requirements to the engineering team, if you've taken the time to outline your idea or your vision with a visual design, if you build that yourself, you will walk through the steps that a user will go through and you'll be able to identify corner cases and situations that might be hard to predict when you're just writing out a spec or a ticket in Jira. I also think that prototyping and doing like that low fidelity or medium fidelity design work is one of the few opportunities that product managers have to do work where they get into a flow state. And what I mean by a flow state is like really working in that area where you're focused for hours and you're really into what you're doing. So I would absolutely recommend all PMs to spend some quality time. I know we're super busy and everything, but working on mastering wireframing and prototyping is great. It will help you sell your ideas. It will teach you a lot about how applications are built and how good products are designed. Now, another great way of becoming better at user experience is studying great design. So, for example, if you are working on user onboarding, there's tons of websites out there that have taken some of the best user onboarding experiences and they break them down chunk by chunk as to how they were designed. I will share a lot of links with our attendees so that they have access to some of these resources. But studying great designs, even if, for example, there's an application that you love, spending some time and looking at how it was built and how it was designed and borrowing those design patterns and bringing them into your own experiences and things like that is incredibly helpful. I can't tell you the number of times I've quote unquote stolen design paradigms from incredible applications and brought them back over to the team because there's no point in really reinventing the wheel. There's tons of resources out there, and so you being very intentional about learning how these products have been built that you enjoy is incredibly helpful. And then maybe a last recommendation that maybe folks don't know is that there are some tests online that allow you to assess what is like your UX skill level. In particular, there's this website called can'tonsea.space that is essentially a test that it's like a competition, it's a game that where they make you evaluate different designs and things like that, and you can kind of rate your skill and of user experience knowledge. And so if folks don't know it, I'll be happy to share this, but I think it's an interesting game. You learn a lot going through it. And oftentimes, I think designers are interviewed using these things and so on. So it's pretty interesting, something that people can use.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I'm curious to find play with that website. Um, Moving on, you now work with 0 to 1 product initiatives with Adobe. Can you explain more about what product 0 to 1 is and how your experience is with this?
Yeah, sure. Let's start by defining what 0 to 1 is. So most people that work in product management, oftentimes they will be hired to come into a team that already has a product or a number of products in market. And they will be given an area of ownership of an existing product with the objective of improving that area or growing the users, monetizing it better, essentially improving an existing product that already exists, that has customers, that has a strategy, and has a go-to-market motion. When you are participating in a 0 to 1 initiative, your job is to essentially start uh, start a product from the ground up. You are you are giving maybe a problem space, a direction. Maybe there is like a deck that an executive put together, but it is your job to essentially define from the ground up a brand new product. And that's very different because you have no customers. You might have a business hypothesis that you need to validate, but you don't have any distribution, you don't have marketing, you don't have sales. So it's your responsibility to come up with an idea, validate that idea, make it sure that it happens, and then finding a way to distribute it to the world to see if you can achieve your goals. So in other words, it's kind of like the closest thing to starting your own startup, except sometimes this happens within companies. Um, and just to kind of answer what I like about like 0 to 1 initiatives and what I find difficult about 0 to 1 initiatives, I think like a startup, it's when you are working from the ground up, you have this incredible like privilege to build something from the ground up. And therefore, like the team is incredibly invested. There's this big sense of ownership that you're building something net new. You get to define the entirety of the experience, you get to define everything yourself. But just like a startup, the probability of success for 0 to 1 initiatives is incredibly low. And especially when you're working in big established companies, there's a very high bar for you to be able to ship net new products. There's a lot of like institutional policies and there's a lot of politics to be able to overcome all of those to make it to market. And just like for a startup, getting new customers when your product doesn't exist in the market is an incredibly costly endeavor. It's not easy. So the good news and the great thing about it is that you get to essentially bring an idea to life from the ground up. And if you do it, it's an incredible success for everybody involved. The negatives of it is that it's incredibly difficult to pull off. It can be very disheartening. Like a startup, you might have to pivot multiple times, and the probability of success is very, very low.
Do you have any frameworks that you usually use? Any tactics on for success?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say the main the main objective that you have as a 0 to 1 product manager is you essentially are trying to identify a real problem, and that is the hardest part, right? So what you have in mind is like, have you identified a real problem that needs solving? And if you have, how big and how important is that problem for the people that you're targeting? And if it's big enough and important enough, are they willing to pay for it, or are they willing to spend significant time in your product using that your product to solve that issue? So your entire focus should be validating that business hypothesis and making sure that you have a lot of signal to do it. So in terms of tactics on how to do it, I think one of the most important things that you can do is set up an experimentation and validation framework for your team as quickly as possible so that you can be collecting information and data, both quantitative and qualitative, as soon as possible. Let me give you an example. Because we don't have any customers that are interacting with our software in the early stages of a 0 to 1 initiative, how do you know if you're building the right thing? What we do in my team, for example, is in the early stages before we had any customers, we were building for ourselves. And we would essentially do at the end of every sprint, we would do usability surveys for the entire team anonymized. And we would keep an internal net promoter score for our own build, where all of the people in the team and all of our stakeholders would use the latest build and they would give us legitimate feedback as to if whether they were using it or not. We also instrumented the entire product to see if people were actually using it in the weekends and trying to use it for the objectives that they were that we had outlined. Now, not everybody in the team is the perfect audience for the product that we're building, but they could be a proxy. Essentially, if you yourself as a team are not even using it, then what is the probability that other people are going to be using it? And this works when you're building, like for example, a consumer product. So dog fooding is incredibly important. So that would be one framework, one recommendation: collect data, quantitative and qualitative, as soon as possible, and be honest about what you're getting from that data. Uh, Another framework that I think is very important in 0 to 1 is don't reinvent the wheel. There's a ton of products out there in the world. There's products that have incredible adoption. If you are working or building something tangential to something else that already has a lot of penetration in the market, try to borrow patterns and things that already exist in those products, because if they have a lot of adoption, millions of users, hundreds of millions of users, billions of users, chances are that they've already done a lot of learning that you can borrow to integrate inside of your product to shortcut that thing. And I'm talking there about like user experience, patterns, and things like that. That saves you a ton of time. So don't be scared about like quote unquote stealing. You're just borrowing and enhancing it. That's a big one for me. You're not going to teach people how to do things that they're already doing very comfortably in their phones or online every day. Instead, borrow them and improve them. So borrowing is a huge one. We talked about experimentation, we talked about that. And then another thing that determines the success is the speed at which you iterate. You should be shipping very frequently when you're doing 0 to 1. The ability to iterate, collect, and ship and ship and ship and ship, because you are basically hunting for product market fit. You're trying to get it. It's very important that you have a dynamic team that is like shipping consistently and continuously.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of that. I know we don't have that much time, but we do have a question, and I'll end with that question. But I really appreciate Santiago sharing all of this. This was wonderful knowledge that we can all use. We have somebody who asked, what new trends do you see in product management?
That's a great question. Um, I will say that something that I've noticed happening in product management over the last decade, it's essentially a specialization within the product management field. So when I began, there wasn't such a thing as growth product management, for example, which is a subcategory of product management. One of the trends that I foresee is that there's these niches within product management that are starting to emerge inside of the field. So, for example, there's some incredible folks that focus on growth product management, which is all about like increasing the number of users or growing the revenue that products are generating. And these folks are very, very, very good at doing A/B testing, multivariate testing, and it's much more about like the scientific aspect and the quantitative aspect of product management. Conversely, there's other product management specialties that are much more focused on product sense. One of them being, for example, the 0 to 1 initiative, which is where you have to really understand and have very deep empathy about the consumers or or the target personas that you're targeting. So if I could summarize that, I think that there's these niches of specialization that are being created inside of the product management field that hadn't existed in the past, and folks are like targeting those or seeking those experiences to round themselves up in product management. Another interesting trend that I've noticed recently is that I've noticed a lot of engineers wanting to transition to product management much more than I had in the past. And I think that that's a net positive in general, because I think having a technical background can certainly be very helpful, especially when you're doing machine learning oriented, like products or things that require deep technical knowledge. I think it's great to see that more and more engineers are wanting to become product owners and more on the definition and business side of the equation.
Thank you for that. I think that's all the questions that we had. Thank you so much for all that information, Santiago. That was wonderful how you
No,
broke everything down and sharing your experiences. We really appreciate it.
thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. We've included how people can reach you and in the post. And if you can share those resources with me, I'll definitely post them in the posting for LinkedIn.
I certainly will. All right.
Thank you so
Have a
much.
good one.
Have a great
Take
night.
care.
Thanks.